So today we're going to be looking at something from the mid 80s to the late 80s, and whilst this is the game, there was, like most of the games back in the old days, you used to have mini games quite often attached to the primary game. So like in D&D, you had the role-playing game as the main game, followed by the mini games of combat, unarmed combat, waterborne, and so on, where you could slot in whatever system you wanted to slot into and bounce in and out. So with this particular role-playing game, which as you can see is set within the Star Trek universe, the mini game that we're going to look at today, and the game that we actually really enjoyed, the Star Trek Starship Tactical Combat Simulator. Okay, that is one mouthy title, but let's get cracking. So whilst this has a mini game which is all about ship-to-ship combat and starship, the starship rules and so on, we still need to probably touch on a little bit about the actual role-playing game. Only in that, as part of the game itself, there is an option to expand the tabletop game into the actual role-playing game and so on. So what we'll do is we'll have a little quick look at some of the sheets that are involved. Remember, this is from the 80s, so there's a little bit of chunkiness. It's not as smooth and clean as the modern games, but I will also need to warn everybody that the overall, we'll say it, the quality of the actual printing that I've got, because as you can tell, I've run with a download and print it out, as opposed to having my original copy, which has long been since delivered to the off to wherever it is that old games go when they've been thrown out. Alright, let's get started. So this game uses pen and paper, and generally 2 sheets. We'll get those out of the way for the moment. And lots of boxes to be ticked. So this is actually written in. There are blank versions of all of this to fill in what you need, but they do have some of these just to sort of pre-fill for some of the most popular ships. And basically, when you're looking at a starship, Constitution, which is like the 1701 back in the original series, you have the impulse engines, how many energy points, warp drives, how many energy points, for a total combined number of points, and then you adjust where those points are going. So it's a game of resources. You move it to how you want to move. You slot in how many points you want for shields and how many points you want to slot for actual weapons. One combat round is split into 3 phases. So you move 1/3 of your distance, then you have an option of firing or no firing, then you move 1/3, then you move 1/3, and during any one of those times you can fire off whatever weapon is available. As you take damage, now this is set up with every round, because at the end of each round you reset. The first thing you do at the beginning of every round is work out where your energy is going. So yep, there's lots of little boxes, and it can be a little bit messy in this instance, but there's also a simplified version where you can just simply adjust it for how you need along the way. So as I said, this is the tabletop version of what is in the role-playing game. And when you play the role-playing game, you're actually the characters take on the role of one of the department heads most often, or a senior officer, which includes obviously the captain, the helm, the navigator, engineer, communications, science, medical, and I'm sure that in security and so on. So basically you take on that, then you do your adventures and you do your missions and that. Then in space, everyone has work that they can do. So if you're running it as part of the role-playing game, the engineer can get out some extra energy points. The helmsman can get out some extra movement points. The navigator can get out some extra shield points. The science officer can target locks and scan, as well as improve weapon accuracy. The communications and medical, they deal with damage control and crew casualties. So there are things that players do that, even if they're not doing something specifically to do with the combat, they've always got something to do. And so basically from there, everyone has stats which you then adjust and so on. In a basic form of the game, we break a lot of that down, and rather than coming in with some much more complex charts, because there are even further complex charts, which you can then use to repair, as well as rearm and retool and so on, and you've got more options when it's a role-playing game. But it's simplified down for when it's just a tabletop version. That's pretty much the main differentiator. But aside from that, everything else is about the same. So you have this is just half the board. I've just put a planet in the middle, which creates a sensor shadow and also creates a gravity well. So when you have an anomaly or an object in the middle that can, or somewhere that can do a gravity well, you give them a strength, whether it's like 1, 2, and 3, and then that's how many movement points they have to, if they end their move within one of these rings, then they have to spend a movement point to stay in that spot, otherwise they move in closer, and if they end up colliding to the planet, removed. So simply put, a planet like this might be a rank 2, or you might just say that it's a gravity well of 2. So when you're within the 1 ring, you need to spend 2 movement points. When you move out, you need to spend an extra movement point. So if the ship ends its movement here, they need to spend 2 movement points out of their pool, or they move in 1 ring closer. Sometimes it can be used as a way of getting some additional movement, just to sort of pick up some space, and then, because it's only when you actually end your movement, and then the larger gravity wells might go out to 3. I don't ever recall anything being more than 3, and this one was about a 2, this size. There were larger ones, so that's about here and here. Then these smaller moons don't have one. But I do recall that one being a 2. So pretty much that's how gravity works. Apart from that, you can move around. When you're moving, 1 movement point moves forward, 1 movement point actually goes there, so it does a slide, and so on. So, and the same thing on the other side. And the movement point also turns on an angle. So this is an example of how movement works per phase. You have your number of movement points that you've generated based on what you've spent, and then how it equates per phase. Each round has 3 phases of movement, and at the end of each movement you can choose to fire or not fire. Initiative is determined by who spends the most in movement. This is an example of what 1 movement point can give you, which is basically what we're just discussing. You can actually spend 1 movement point if you're only going forward to jump a spot. So you can get a lot of distance as long as you're only moving in that one direction. You can't change facing or anything like that. So if you wanted to move 1 hex forward and then change facing, you can only move 1 hex forward. If you want to keep moving forward, then you can do the occasional skipper hex. So here we have scenario, we've got 2 moons, planet, and we've got our ship. From the role-playing game point of view, what the captain would do when all of this is done in the game, the captain would say, the player who's the captain would say, bring the ship round between the 2 moons. And if there was another vehicle at the top here, then the captain would say, if possible, bring weapons to bear. He wants one to start off with the photons and then come in with the phasers for the rest afterward. So the captain would issue the order. Done. The helmsperson would then work out what weapons are going to be fired and at what points they're going to spend on those weapons. The navigator would work out what shields were going to be lifted and raised, dropped, how the points were going to be moved, and the engineer will do their best to send all of the energy to the systems for the others to work out. Obviously on the tabletop form, it's all done on the same person, but from a role-playing point of view, it's really interesting when you actually have the different characters doing their thing. The engineering guy gets to do an engineer check to see if any more points can be drawn out for energy. The helms person makes their check to see if any more movement points can be pulled out, and the same thing with the navigator with the shields. And the science officer, if there's a ship, can attempt to do a sensor lock. In this instance there's a sensor shadow, so no lock can be done because it's within a sensor shadow of how from here coming to here it blocks everything there. And this is an example of a sensor shadow just off of one, like a small moon. So it's easy to hide your ships if necessary, and you need to be able to see them to be able to shoot at them. If you, in the games, if you do sensor locks, then you can get more information about the type of ship, where the energy is being funneled, and so on. But again, you can build up all of the stats. So if you wanted to create a campaign where your captain builds up experience based on combat and so on, and you only just do the ship based rather than any of the actual boarding actions or planet actions, you could still do all of that and stick with all of this, and it works very well. So this is the Constitution class ship that's being piloted today, and it's hard to tell, but this is the D7 Klingon. That is the opponent, always with the Klingons. So the first thing is about power allocation. So we have our first turn, we have our full bout of power, which gives us 44 points. And I've put 32 into movement, which will give me 8 movement points. I've put 5 into shields, which gives me 10 shield points, and 7 into weapons. So if we go down to the helm display, how many movement points we have for the round 1? We have 8. This is where our weapons are going. We've got 2 forward facing attacks, or 3 of them, sorry, of 2 points each. And 1 photon torpedo, which is only a forward arc. Now if we can zoom in nicely on here, we can see how this works. Because I've got 10 shield points for the 1, I've put 3 on the first 3 on shields 1, 2 and 3, and I've got 1 point on shield number 5, which is what we've got here. So 1 point on shield number 5, 3 points on each of those. You'll see that it's broken down by a phase, so there are 3 phases within the round. If you take damage, it comes in off those, and you can sort of keep track of it round by round as you go through and reallocate and readjust where it's all going. you can keep a track of that. Over at the Klingon side, we've got less power to play with by a little bit. It's a little bit harder for shields, but we have fewer weapons, so we can allocate some more energy to it. So we still have 5 movement points, and now we can allocate 2 phases, 5 points each. As the phases have a maximum of 6 damage, I've just gone 5 points each. And the same deal with the shields. We've got 10 shield points, and I've just done the same thing. Every round, when you get to readjust and reallocate, you get to play with these mixes, and it's, as I said before, it's a game of resource management, which is also quite cool because you don't quite know how you want to try and play it. 8 movement versus 5. The first phase of combat, the Klingons will move first because they have a lower movement rate. They'll move 2 hexes. If there was a shot, they could have choose to shoot or not, as your case may be. And as the Federation, as the Constitution class ship has 8, 3. And then you've got your different rates and how they're broken down by the phases of the round, which is pretty cool. So the being able to skip the middle one is good when you're only doing forward runs. So the 2 movement that they get first, 1, 2. Now it's the Federation turn. They move 3, 1, 2, 3. Sensor shadows abound. Neither side can see, and we move to phase 2. Again, the Klingons are first. And as they've only got 1 movement point, that's what they do. The Federation have 2 movement points. 1. And what they do is move there, and because there's a gravity well, they don't spend the extra movement point, and they're there. Again, we've got a sensor shadow between the 2, so there's still no firing. Now we get to the 3rd phase, where he does the slide, and he keeps his position there. Federation has 3 movement points, which allows them to slide, move, and turn. So now we've got shots that we can fire, and we'll consult the charts. So this is the firing chart, and broken down by range, and then by category atop, and every weapon may be slightly different, torpedoes to phasers and so on. Some are better at longer ranges than others, and some just not very good altogether. They may represent different types of weapons and so on. So what we've got at the moment is the following. So we're on the 3rd phase, and now they're able to shoot at each other. Both are practically point blank range, being 2 hexes away. You can see 1, 2, so 2 hexes away. And this one gets to fire in the forward arc with everything, and this one only gets to fire on the port side. So the weapons will fire. A D10 is all that's required in this game, but in this instance, normally there are also other factors that can come into play with minuses to hit with regard to crew losses and other forms of damage that can occur where negatives can be applied to the target number and so on. But they're both fresh, so basically they both just auto hit at this point. And what happens is that you've got this line being where it's drawn in. So from here and across, we're going through this line, which is a border between shield 6 and shield 1. So shield 1 gets to take the brunt, which is better in this instance. So the Constitution class ship can fire 3 phaser banks, each of doing 2 points of damage, and 1 photon torpedo doing 10 points of damage. And in response, looking at 5 points of damage coming back, coming in either the front port, shield 1 or shield 2 for the 5 points of damage. So in this instance, we go through the 3 points of damage on the shield. So that takes the 3 points, leaving 1 further, so the 3 phases, the first one doing 2 damage, the second one doing 2 damage, and then the third one which does 1 superstructure damage, followed by the photon torpedo which does 10, potentially I should say. This is the damage chart, and so basically one of the reasons why you would open up with a photon torpedo first rather than last is because it's just 1 set of damage, and that can blank out the shields, and then you come in with 2 or 3 strikes with the phaser beams afterwards. But I failed to do that, so I'm doing it this way. Now for the 1 point of damage from the phaser bank, you can roll on the D10, and that hits number 1, which is a shield generator, which means that no shields can be used for the rest of the round, for the rest of the game. They now have 0 shields. And the 10 points of damage come in on superstructure. 10 points of damage on the superstructure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What that also equates to is a casualty chart as well, if you want to go that far. And then for every percentage of crew that gets removed, and at this point you're looking at almost like 17 crew for every point of damage. We've cut the crew by half, which also applies a -2 on other ship-based rolls, such as to hit and so on. And we can take off a lot of crew from here, which is about 50, nearing a lot basically. It's nearly 50% or so. We can just scrub all that off. The 5 points of damage done to the Federation ship. So 2 points go through to the soup, go through. So we roll to see where the damage is. And that is also a 1 for the shields. So both ships are without their shields for the rest of the game. But the difference being that the superstructure was damaged by the Federation versus the Klingons, so they've lost a lot of crew and staff and everything else and so on, whereas the Constitution ship has simply lost the shields. Again, in the more advanced form of this game, when you're attaching it to maybe the role-playing game, or you want to have the command crew positions filled, you can make repair rolls and checks, and there's a much more complex chart for coming in based on what angle you're at, which is this one. So if you're on chart C, which Constitution is, still would have been the shield generator, but only for shield 1. So only shield 1 shields would have gone down, and not the whole shield system, and so on. So then basically from there you've got different weapons, damages, structures, engine hits. But if you're going to play with that, I would recommend that you at least give certain values to the role-playing game stats, so you can then do repairs and so on. If you want to know more about that, let me know, and I can do a brief overview of why this game is quite cool from a role-playing game point of view. They do a few different things that weren't done back in the day. And yeah, so it's reasonable anyway if you wanted to do all of that. Having a qualified or an expert engineer gets you a few extra points of energy out of the engines. You get a few extra movement points out of the helm. Navigator gets a few extra shield points, that sort of thing. So the Klingon, having lost all the shields, but no engine damage was done, so they've still got the full energy available, have decided to put it all into movement, which gives them 10 movement points. And the Federation have put 32 points into movement to give them 8 movement points and 12 to weapons. So 3 forward banks, 4 points each. They can do a maximum of 5. So they each move 3, but the Constitution has 8 points versus 10 points from the Klingon, so the Constitution has to go first. 1, 2, 3. Now these hexes are actually quite large, technically, so they can end up being in the same space without collision or anything else. Alright, so 3 points for the Klingon. 1, 2, 3, which gets us out of danger. Again, this point no shots. Sometimes ships have aft weapons, which obviously means that you can take shots, but these ones do not. And now it's the second phase. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So you sense a shadow behind that. 1, 2, 3, which would be the forward arc if he had any weapons going. Round 3, we've still got 44 points to play with, putting 32 into movement, no shields because they're down, 12 points into weapons, and in round 3 I'm going 5 points for the forward port, 5 points for the forward starboard, and then 1 each on the photon torpedoes. Over at the Klingon side, 40 points still, 32 for the movement, 4 for the weapons, 8 for the weapons, I meant to say, which gives us 4 points each on the 2 forward phaser banks. 8 movement points, so the first one was 5 movement points, 10 movement points, 8 movement points. Since both captains are exactly the same movement speed, so they both have 8 movement points, it's a roll off. So Constitution class is a 5 and 10 for the Klingon. The Klingon's considered to have the advantage. The Federation moves first. So the Enterprise, the Constitution class goes first. 1, 2, 3. Klingon, 1, 2, 3. So both line of sight, forward facing, and we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes from each other. And they're both just going to unload and see what damage can be done for 5 hexes. The Klingon fires first, has a weapon rating of T, and at 5 hexes is 1 to 8. Firing 2 phases. Here we go. And hits with the first one, doing 5 points of damage, which go through, and then we roll on the damage location for 9. 9 is superstructure, so that comes straight off the points for the Constitution class. And the second one, 8. If you remember, we're at -2 for our crew because we're down to half crew, so that goes to 6. As in the difficulty, instead of 1 to 8 now goes 1 to 6, so doesn't actually manage to hit this one. Starting with the phases first, the Constitution class fires off. Normally it's a 1 to 9 at this range, but now that they've taken some superstructure damage, they've lost some crew, and now they're at -1 on their combat rolls, or on the targets to hit, so now it's a 1 to 8. Misses on the first one. Misses on the second one. And now we're firing off the 2 photon torpedoes, which require 1 to 5 or 6. We'll have a look in a sec. It's a 10. Nope. Not even gonna look. And 9. Absolutely nothing. So that's a total whiff for the Constitution class. They could have easily have sewn this up without a doubt just by landing one of those photon torpedoes. Okay, 10-4. Still looking at 44 points. 32 for movement, 12 onto weapons, but instead we're firing up all the phaser banks to go for hits. 3 at 4 points apiece. 40 points total units available. 36 to movement, giving them 9 movement points, and 4 points for weapons for one of the forward firing weapons, obviously. So the Enterprise goes first, or the Constitution class. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It's in the aft, so it can't be fired at. That's in the starboard side. And I've chosen to put it in the port side. So there you go. So no firing this time around. Phase 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. And that is in the port side. 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes. So that would be normally a 1 to 9, but with the superstructure damage and crew control, etc., down to 1 to 7. Hits and does 4 points of damage, and we roll for simplified damage. So that was on the shield generator, already been hit, so it gets replaced with the superstructure. Basically on the simple damage chart, if something is gone, then you just take that off and replace it with superstructure. Engines, when they get hit, they lose the amount of energy for the damage being taken if the engine is struck. Beam weapons, missile weapons, they get damaged, move off. If you've got multiple beam weapons, obviously then you can keep taking them off until you've got no more beam weapons, and then it becomes superstructure. Same thing with the sensors. So now it's phase 3. 1, 2, 3. And 1, 2, 3. Sensor shadow. Basically can't get a line of sight shot from there. So the benefit of going faster is you get to react a little bit easier to the move, and you get to fire first. So the person who's slower, or who chooses to have less movement points, it's not about who puts the energy into it, it's about how many movement points you get. Whoever has the least movement points has to move first, and then the person who has the highest movement points gets to fire first. So that's an interesting tactic, and you can see where some of the more modern games get that idea from. 44 points, 32 into movement, 12 into energy, into the weapon still, going for 8 movement points, 3, bank 1, 4 for the forward firing bank, and 3 for the forward and starboard, and 2 photon torpedoes. I think it's proton torpedoes. I've been calling them photons. I wonder where I get that from. 40, 32 for the movement, and 8, giving us 2 phaser banks, 4 each. So it's a roll off for who has priority. Constitution rolls a 9, rolls a 9. Constitution rolls an 8, just doing a roll off until we get a result, and 3. There you go. So the Constitution's got priority. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And firing into the aft of the Klingon vessel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With the loss of crew, their 1 to 9 goes to 1 to 7, and they get 3 shots. 3, 4, and 3. So that's first one hits. For the damage location being number 4, which is the engine. So the engine suddenly loses some shots, they lose some energy, and that has to be modified now. So now that they've taken those hits, that's got to come out of the rest of the round's worth of energy, which can sometimes reduce shields, reduce weapons, and so on, and movement. Now for the next one, that one missed, and the final phaser for 5, which hits, and that's going into location 4, which is the engine again. So the engine's taken 6 points of damage to take 6 warp off. So the 2 torpedoes, now modified to 1 to 6, we'll fire them both off. Misses and hits, and location 2, which is a beam weapon. We just randomly select a beam weapon and it's damaged. So basically all that's happening now is movement. He's running off. He moved forward but got caught in the gravity well and had to move 1 step in closer to the planet. And for the next phase is 3 movements apiece. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So this just puts the Constitution class ship just into the aft section. So the way the aft is measured, there's obviously the first one, then it's these 3 here, that counts as aft, then it's the next ones around, which happen to just hit here. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right there, then it goes out again. So it's just managed to be in that next layer, only just. So the Klingon's in trouble, and what we need to do is just reallocate for round 6, work out all of our energy values and redistribute. Because it's been working for us so far, still got the 44, haven't had any damage to the engines. Going with 32 for movement for 8 points, 8 movement points, and 12 on the weapons, going for 3 shots, 4 of a piece along the phaser banks. With the loss of energy, damage to the engines, we're down to 34. We've gone 7 points for the movement, so 28 points of energy, and 6 points for phaser banks, which hopefully, living in hope, is 2 of 3. You can see 1 weapon is gone. So the Klingon goes first and has 2 movement points. 1, 2. 3 points for the Constitution class. 1, 2, 3. And we're three spaces away from the Klingon coming into the aft. So that would be an auto hit normally, 1 to 10, but we've downmined 2 points because of the damage control to crew, or crew. First one hits, 3 points, and the location is superstructure because we've already damaged the shields. So the superstructure takes another 4 points. It's another hit for the location. Superstructure. So there's only 2 points of superstructure left remaining. That is a hit. That's just hit. And now we roll for damage. Location 6, which is another engine hit. Alright, so what we'll do is we'll call it here just because they've now taken enough superstructure damage that they've only got less than 40 crew left, which works out to be well over 70%. It's like nearly, yeah, they've only got 2 points of superstructure left. And so that means that the ship is in dire need. They can no longer fire. Once you've taken enough crew, you can't take enough crew damage, you can't fire anymore. And you're at -4s on all sorts of things, and it's all crazy. So basically, this is one of those things where, so obviously, if you had repair options and repair abilities, you could work on shields, work on weapons during the game. You could see how much movement you can get, and if you start playing it from the with a few of the specialized command crew, what you can do in terms of working out percentages and so on. Happy to run through how the game works, because the game itself is okay. I'll say that, it's okay. It does provide a ton of information about Star Trek that you would not normally have had. They had all sorts of libraries opened up to them from the production companies, from the general notes, and from the original creators, and all of those sorts of things. So it's great. So there's a lot of information that you don't get from the shows, which have probably all been retconned. But anyway, so we'll call this the end. Now, if they do self-destruct, which is likely, especially if you're a Romulan, that's going to get caught and would probably destroy it from there anyway. So they could always do that if they wanted to. That's always an option. Go down in a blaze of glory. That's why sometimes you don't want to get too close. Now this is also good for doing missions. So I don't know if anyone's ever played Starfleet Battles or Starfleet Command on the computer, where you can have all sorts of little missions for scanning sensors and doing things, and you can set up experience points. Again, you can back it off the role-playing game without having to play the role-playing game by keeping it to straight out ship combat and ship things. And then if a role-playing game happens, well, it happens, you know. Yeah. So, but anyway, all right. So hopefully this has sort of brought someone joy. As I said, we played this game only for the tactical game. Now this is all the printed cutouts and everything else. The original game came with thick cardboard pieces and beautiful maps and all sorts of stuff. If you can find the original one, good luck. But they're pretty cool. It is all available through, obviously, your favorite to print on demand service. And this does work. It's a good system. That was with one ship a piece, which is great. Once you start getting 2 or 3 ships, you want to start having extra players. You want to be able to put on a few extra players. You might even want to start doing things like a dreadnought battle versus some of the smaller cruisers and so on. The Kobayashi Maru was always a good example. And you can just keep rolling it in and bringing in and working from there. Alright, so hopefully everyone's liked what we've done today. It's completely left of field, not in our usual wheelhouse, and this is, for all intents and purposes, a dead game. But I still like to look at it, and I still like to reminisce fondly with with how we played and the sort of games that we used to do. And as I said, this is a great mini game that could have easily been a game on its own. And you can do this as a game on its own if you get the ships from like Ironwind Metals. There are models of the ships available that are in miniature form, and you might even be able to find the artwork to be able to do some print on demands. And then you can just put it on some hex paper, print out the right size hexes, and just go for it. So thank you for watching, thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, all of that. Patreon is always available. I'm trying to put some things up through the Patreon just to sort of keep that ticking over. Let me know what you're after. If you want some help, notes, or whatever on something specific about D&D or any of the other games that we've covered, or anything else from the TSR stable back in the 80s. But have fun, stay safe, and I look forward to doing this again. All right, thanks guys. Catch you later.